I like the snake, and it reminded me of the question of why Adam and Eve could not have been Chinese. And the answer is because we would have eaten the snake. I didn't tell you in 18 minutes, because I've been told 15 times that I only got 18 minutes, the secret of life. I will try to tell you the secret of life in 15 minutes. But before that, I want to tell you my journey of life, and because I'm by far the oldest of the speakers, I'm 58, I really need more than 18 minutes. So when 18 minutes come, then I have to stop and you have to invite me back to hear the other half. My life in Hong Kong started really when my great-grandfather came as a refugee from Canton, and he became very successful, and he built a house on Gough Road, which I pass very regularly, of 7 stories. And he was very smart. He had a wife and 5 concubines. So he placed them on the 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor, 5th floor, 6th floor, and on the penthouse, he lived on his own. So he worked his way on Monday to Saturday, raised the red lantern, and he rested. And on the 4th floor was my great-grandmother, who produced my grandfather, who was a great philanthropist here, because he donated most of my money to you through Tang Hospital and what have you. He was like 4,000 years of Chinese husbands wanting an heir. Although he wasn't exactly Henry VIII, he married a first wife who didn't produce an heir, a girl, so he dumped her. So he then went on to a second concubine, who turned out to be barren, so he dumped her. And then he met my beautiful grandmother, who produced an heir. And he was very happy until my father got ill about 2 months in. And the doctor came and told him that he was going to die. And my grandfather was very, very sad, because having waited for so long for an heir, he couldn't believe that my father was going to die. And my great-grandmother, who wanted to comfort him, told him a lie. He said, look, I had the feng shui man in the other day, and he told me this son is no good for you anyway. And so we can try again. But my father recovered. But because my grandfather was so superstitious, he actually decided that the son was going to be bad for him, and he said to my grandmother, you're off. I don't want you anymore, and I don't want our child anymore. And she was then pushed out and never saw him again for 80 years. And he gave her so little money that we hardly survived. And eventually, my father was rather awkward, because my grandfather was getting rather famous, and he didn't want, in marrying his 4th concubine, to have somebody with a sort of slightly murky past. So he said to my father, you better go off to England with your wife and stay there. So my father and my mother were packed off, and I was left with my grandmother. And we didn't have any money. We rented a room in Junction Road in Kowloon Tong, and my brother and me sleeping on the top bunk bed, and my grandmother below. And I remember very distinctly that there was no air conditioning, whereas there was air conditioning in our landlady's bedroom. We only had a fan, and I would wake up and I would notice that my mother would actually angle poise the fan towards my brother and me so that we would be cooler. And I remember at Christmas time we'd go out to dinner, and she would take us to Tai Ping Kun, and we loved prawns. But prawns were the most expensive. They were $10 each. And my brother and I would have prawns, and then I would notice she would only have pork, which was $3, because we didn't have enough money for 3 prawns. And so I became very conscious that there are some extraordinarily strong people in the world, my grandmother, who really sacrificed everything to bring us up. And I loved her to the end of her life, and she never complained, and notwithstanding how my grandfather treated her, she never moaned about him. And I think that this is a secret of life here somewhere along the line, which I'm going to alert you afterwards. But then I was packed off to England to join my parents, who had gone there for 2 years and prepared ourselves. And I remember getting on a boat, and we sailed to Athens, and we went to Belgrade, Vienna, and Paris by train. I remember in Vienna I saw a statue called Beethoven. Now, I didn't know who that was. I saw Mozart, I didn't know who he was. I went to Paris, we went to the Louvre, I didn't know what that was. But it was all going to come back. And this is another aspect of the secret of life that I'm going to tell you about. And when I got to England, my parents had prepared me for an interview at a very famous school. And I, although went to La Salle, couldn't really speak English. And my mother said, now look, let me do all the talking at the interview. All you have to say is that my name is David Tang. So we arrived, and the headmaster came in and said, right, have you had a good journey from Hong Kong? So I said, my name is David Tang. Well, I didn't get in. So that was that. And eventually we found a school, and because I was just about all right in mathematics, thank God, and your president would be pleased to hear that, the school took me on, and I failed my English O-levels 6 times before I passed. Although I got Latin, French, and Russian, because we all started on Form 3, and I was able to start at the same time. But in English, I was not able to pass the wretched exam. I practically failed to get into university, because in England, you had to get English to go to university. And I remember my English teacher saying to me, Tang, you will never speak English fluently. So that's another aspect of the secret of life that I'm going to tell you about, because I met that man about 30 years later. And I told him that he was wrong, and I use a word which I really can't use in front of the president here, followed by the word you. I said I am very fluent in the Anglo-Saxon tongue. Then I went to university, and I read initially mathematics and physics. That got very hard, and I switched over to philosophy. And I love philosophy because there was a formal logic part which I enjoyed. And I then went on to try to do a PhD. By this time, my grandfather realized that perhaps I wasn't too bad. And he said, you've got to become a lawyer, typical of, sort of Hong Kong parents. I said, well, what's in it for me? Because by that time, I got very commercial. He said, if you went to law school, I'll get you a flat in London. So I said, you're going to give me a flat in London, I'll do anything. So I stopped doing my PhD. I went to the law college, I was bought a flat. Then I cultivated a great sense of gambling. And I went, and one day I saw this amazing horse called Nijinsky win the Derby. And it was last. And I watched that film about 28 times. And I saw him coming up the last 2 furlongs and then winning, like an arrow, less to pickle on it. And I said, I'm going to put everything I have on the next race that this horse is going to race. And he went on to France at what was another huge race called the Arc de Triomphe. And I mortgaged my house, which was £40,000, and I put it on the nose, 11 to 8, and it lost by a nose. So I lost the flat. And unfortunately, my grandfather, the following month, said, my lawyer, Mr. Kwan Cho Yeo, is going to come to London to inspect the flat that I bought you. and I was in a slight panic. So I rang up a friend of mine who had a slightly better flat, about £60,000, and I said, look, can you lend it to me for a day? So I put all my photographs out. The great Mr. Kwan came and said he was very satisfied. And he said, did you really buy this for £40,000? I said, yes. He said, listen, can you give me the name of the agent? Anyway, I sort of fudged it a bit and told him that he died or something. But what happened then was that I went to a casino one night and I won back all the money. And I bought the flat. And this is another aspect of the secret of life that I'm going to come back to. And even more extraordinarily was that having won back the flat, I had a friend who lived up in northern England, and I went up and I went to the casino, and I lost everything again for the second time in my life. And I met a Chinese man who ran a Chinese restaurant there. And I went up and I said, look, listen, my grandfather is Tang. Can you lend me £5,000? Because I'm going to pay you back over the weekend. Well, stupidly he did. And I lost that. And then I went to see him in Leeds, I remember. It was a rather nice detached house. And I said, look, Tony, I can't pay you back. But what I will promise you is that if I ever become successful, which I shall, I'm going to let you ask me a favor. Now, to cut a long story short, I paid him back £5,000 over about a year. And 16 years later, I got a phone call from him. And I said, hello. He said, is Tony Kwan here? I said, my God. I said, you're calling in for your favor. He said, yes. I said, do you want to borrow some money? He said, no. He said, do you remember when you came to see me at my home? I had a child, and she is now 21, and all she wants to do is to get a job from you at Shanghai Tang. So I said, is that all? That's all. So I took her on. She was fantastic. She worked for me for 7 years, and it was fantastic. 5 years later, he rang me again. And I said, look, Tony, you've used up your one favor. And he says, you remember there was a cot, there was a child, baby, that's my son. He now wants to work for you. So I said, oh, God, all right, well, bring him along. So he started working for me. He was stupid. Can't get rid of him. And that's another aspect of the secret of life that I wanted to tell you about. After all this, I then decided I had to do some work. And at that time, energy was a big thing. And I wanted to drill some oil wells and go and work at a gold mine because I was fascinated by that world. And in that time, China just opened up this offshore oil. And I worked for an oil entrepreneur, and I drilled 10 wells, and I went to Africa, South America, looking at gold mines and so forth. We didn't find any oil, we didn't find any gold, there was absolutely nothing. But it gave me tremendous experience. After which, I said to myself, I better go back to law, which was what my grandfather deflected me to, and I started working as a lawyer in Hong Kong. And I want to tell you another extraordinary story, which was another illustration of what the secret of life is all about. I was in a firm of solicitors being instructed by a construction company who had placed an electric fence round a building site in Hong Kong. And a child got electrocuted and died. Now, usually you can't, for those of you who do law, really prosecute a company for murder or manslaughter, but they actually prosecuted a foreman. So we had to defend the foreman, and it was going really badly. And on the last day, after 2 weeks, I said to my barrister friend, I said, look, it's been a really difficult week. Why don't we go and have a proper lunch? And in those days, it was just up Hollywood Road. And the only restaurant that was open was an Indian restaurant. So we went in and started hoovering up all this Indian food with 10 chapatis and poppadoms. At 2 o'clock sharp, I felt a real urge in the direction of the lavatory. And so I dived in there, asking the judge to defer the hearing for 15 minutes. And I was in the loo when I heard two people come in, and they were having a pee. And one of them said to the other, he says, look, you are the engineer. You tell us whether that system was safe or not. And he said, well, I don't think it was safe. So I realized then that there were two jurors who were talking to each other. And of course, one of the basic tenets of jury service is that you mustn't consult with another. So I got very excited, and I held my breath, I held everything until they left. Then after a huge explosion, I went straight out to the barrister, and I told him, and we got a retrial. And thank God, because the judge said that he would have sent him to jail. On the retrial, he got off. And again, this is an aspect of the secret of life which I'm coming very near to telling you. And I think that after that, I wanted to go and start something that had some cultural value, because I saw Hong Kong was going towards the West, like the way in which China is, with these rich ghettos of stupid Western brand shops of Christian Dior and Louis Vuitton and what have you. And nobody's doing anything about cultivating and improving and innovating our Chinese heritage. And I had become very interested in art. I remember 1971 when I went to see Chiang Kai-shek's first exhibition at the City Hall. I was fascinated by how this man transcended the traditional way of painting with black ink, but using this turquoise and green and wonderful colors. And I passed by this gallery in Hollywood Road, which was then owned by my now great friend Johnson Chang. I saw this fantastic painting by him, and I went in and I said, how much? And he said, $500,000. I couldn't possibly afford that. But then I remember the film I saw of Glenn Miller, the great trumpeter, and he did the same. He saw a great trumpet, and he said, look, I'll pay by bits. So I'm going to give you $5 each month, and you only give me the instrument at the end. So I started paying $10,000 a month, $20,000 a week, and eventually I got that painting. And from that painting, I started my collection, and we all bounded into the China Club. Now, I'm sure that 18 minutes is coming up, so halfway through my life, I want to tell you that the secret of life, actually, is more or less what Rob was telling you about, is that you cannot start setting goals so far away, and that a lot of the times is providence, and about whether you are at the right place at the right time, and how things work out in your life without the feng shui man who told my grandfather that my father was bad for him, I would never have gone to England. If I'd gone to England and was told that I already spoke good English, and not having to show my English teacher that I was able, and I would prove him wrong, I might not have done as well as I might have today. And I think the gambling, losses and so forth, meant also that we take huge risks in life and experience huge failure. I don't know whether any of you is a secret addicted gambler, but that feeling, and I'm sure none of you will tell me because we used to be liars, and that feeling of gambling beyond your means, you see, that is tremendous adrenaline. But you have to do it and lose everything before you can feel it. And there is another way of saying, well, you lose everything, but you make it back. And it doesn't matter. And that's another secret of life, is that whatever happens to you, you have to decide for yourself to keep going. And I think Rob has almost stolen my speech before me by setting out all these things. And I got so many people, young people like you, coming to see me, asking me what they should do in life. And they say they want to be a doctor, they want to be a vet, or they want to build a zoo or whatever. There is a film about a family building a zoo. But the point is that you cannot set yourself goals. so far away and be so determined. The problem is that we have a lot of biographies, and we read so many stories about men who are successful, and we say, well, Richard Branson already had an acumen for business because he started selling bicycles, second-hand bicycles, when he was young. But imagine the hundreds of thousands of other students who did more or less the same, or even more successful, but did not become nearly as successful as Richard Branson. So we have the benefit of hindsight a lot of time when we fit our facts into biographies. There is no other way of going about it, but I'm just warning you that a lot of the times when we reflect back how we ever came to a particular situation or success or failure is never something that we ever expect. I can tell you that. Life never happens the way you think it does. I used to be asked, how do you make God laugh? Well, tell him your plans. Okay, now, I'm sure that 18 minutes is up. I could stand here and tell you the rest of my life story, which is not entirely uninteresting, but it is all because of providence, fortune, luck, and I don't set myself huge goals. I take the day as it comes, but when you see something, you have to seize it, and when you are presented with a risk, take it. Take it. Doesn't matter. Don't think of the consequences. Because if you do, you will never be a great man. No human progress has ever happened because of what everybody does and what everybody thinks. The world goes round, spins round, entirely on crazy ideas and unnecessities. And it's like people saying to you, why do you want to do that? You don't have to. You don't have to. That is precisely why you do it. And that is what makes the difference. Boys and girls, I'm going to say, because I'm so old. Thank you for having me. And I'm sorry that I'm rambling on a little bit, but I was asked to come and tell you about my life. I've had a very varied life. I've experienced quite a lot. And I hope all of you will have the same kind of varied life you have, because what is the point for being just insular? I come from a middle class, but I hate having middle class values of just worrying about what your neighbor has or whatever it is. And you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Break out. Come on. Do something, not deliberately crazy, but let life come on to you, and you can just, occasionally at least, take a risk and try something different, because sometimes you might actually like it. But try to avoid Happy Valley. Thank you very much.